classics all in a row at the MX1, South Carolina. Look at that. So I'm here at the BMW Genesis exhibit, here near the Performance Center near Greer, South Carolina. You're never going to see cars like this around anywhere.
Legendary.
And that was his favorite driver. He would he said every once in a while somebody would be playing basic.
Three-stroke 15, introduced in the summer of 1929, was the first car to wear the Bison Blau, the white and blue BMW roundel above its grille. The cabriolet in front of you was built in the Eisenach factory a year later in August 1930 and delivered to the dealership in Dresden, where it was sold to a group of medical doctors in Leipzig, about 60 miles away. The motoring doctors used the little car to call on patients and deliver medical services in the region. It remained in civilian hands, survived World War II, and came to the U.S. after the war, likely. The 1934 309 Cabriolet was built in Eisenach, Germany, but almost nothing is known about this car's early years, except possibly how it survived the Second World War. The story is, it was hidden in a basement garage by its owner in Munich, with the driveway obscured to conceal it. The house was hit in bombing raids, but the car was not damaged. Years later, an American Army officer stationed in Munich bought it and brought it to the U.S. in 1962. Heading for his home in Oregon, he drove it cross-country at a top speed of 45 miles an hour. But the 309 broke down in San Jose, California, and could go no further. The young officer sold it to a wrecking yard for $25 and continued his journey by bus. Seeing it parked in front of the wrecker a year later in 1963, Jim True thought it was cute and brought it home planning to fix it up. 40 years later, in 2004, Jim had it running, and in 2008, he and wife Mary drove the 309 in the classic car California Marathon. The early BMW cars were small, quick, and agile, but in the BMW decided to build a line of genuine sports roadsters, beginning with the 1934 315-1. The cars had distinctive, low-slung, swoopy bodywork for better aerodynamics. The new Roadsters were a hit with the public, even though they were expensive. The Roadsters came with high-performance, 40-horsepower engines featuring 3 flat-draft carburetors. The few early records that still exist show this car, chassis number 48071, was sold in Kassel, Germany, sometime in 1934. It surfaced again in some photographs around Stuttgart in the early 60s, but no further registrations were recorded after 1962. Offered for sale in decrepit condition in 2012, it was eventually bought by BMW restorer Andreas Freudenberger. It was then acquired in 2017 by well-known classic BMW enthusiast Dirk de Gruen, who brought it to the United States, where it won the BMW of North America trophy for engineering excellence at Amelia Island. Mine was the 319-1. If you're thinking it's actually a 328 Roadster, you are forgiven, as this particular car on occasions, including custom body panels by Weinberger Coachworks, in the mid-1930s. Surprisingly, this car has had only 3 owners in its more than 80 years. Current owner Manny Carter rescued it from storage, buying it sight unseen in 1973 while he was living in Germany. Retiring to Plano, Texas in 2000, Manny brought the 319 with him and has since driven it in many of the BMW Vintage and Classic Club events, as well as the History Channel's Great Race. Remarkably, after more than a lifetime of travel and driving, this 319-1 shows only about 72,000 miles on its odometer. From its debut at the Nürburgring in the summer of 1936, the BMW 328 proved unbeatable in all international sports car races in the 2-liter class. Establishing a BMW tradition that continues to this day, the 328 proved itself at home on the race circuit, but also perfectly suited for everyday motoring. This car, chassis number 85006, was built in April 1937, survived World War II, was brought to the U.S. in the 1950s, probably by a returning service member, eventually was found without an engine or transmission, stashed behind a parking garage in Denver by a young Tom Goodyear in 1955. Goodyear rebuilt and kept the car for decades, but since 2012, it has been owned by enthusiast Dirk de Gruen, who had it fully restored in 2015. The mid to late 1930s were one of the most creative periods for BMW, which was still quite young in automobile production. Some clever engineering led to a series of modern mid-size sedans and cabriolets, many of which were custom bodied by a range of German coach builders. Among them was Draut's Coachworks in Heilbronn, which delivered this beautiful 321 Cabrio to the BMW dealership in Leipzig on May 5, 1939, just a few months before the start of World War II. Little is known of this car's first 65 years until it was discovered in a restoration shop in Germany by Manny Carter and his brother-in-law Wolfgang Reichert in 2006. Carter brought the 321 to the U.S. in 2010, where it achieved notoriety in rallies and concours. Enough so that it attracted the attention of Lance and Diane White, who acquired it from Carter in 2015 and have been enjoying it ever since. So, how does a grateful patron reward a top race driver for his many victories? If you're the legendary motorcycle racer Schorsch Meyer and your patron is BMW, the reward was this stunning 327-28 Cabriolet, built in 1940 with significant performance enhancements befitting the accomplished racer. Meyer and his 327 came through the war just fine and remained together for several years after. What happened to the car between the mid-1950s and the early 1980s is not known, but when it was found in Gary, Indiana in the early 80s, it had been disassembled and was piled full of junk. Only the kidney grills gave it away as a BMW. Then began the years of rebuilding and restoration, first by enthusiast owner Leslie Solberg, then, starting in 2001, by current owner Rick Meinig of Colorado Springs, Colorado. The extensive help and expertise of some well-known classic BMW enthusiasts turned the 80-year-old Cabriolet into what you see today, a beautiful family car for Rick, his wife Kathy, and their kids. The shorter box-frame chassis, first used in 1936, proved to be the perfect platform for the BMW 327/28, an elegant sports coupe with exemplary styling that premiered in the fall of 1938. The shorter wheelbase gave the coupe exceptional agility and comfort, and it was almost as fast as the 328 Roadster. BMW called it the ideal touring car for the discerning driver who enjoys the thrill of speed and the pleasure of sporty driving. This car survived the war, but it was in poor condition by the time it was bought by a BMW enthusiast in the Ukraine in 2001. Years of restoration followed, until in 2014, it took center stage at the RM Classic Car Auction in Scottsdale, Arizona, where it was purchased by Manfred Scharmach, the owner of BMW Northwest in Tacoma, Washington, where it is proudly displayed when it's not traveling to exhibitions like Genesis. The beautiful coupe in front of you looks like a BMW 327 of the late 1930s, when in fact it is an EMW 320 1954. The original BMW car factory in Eisenach became part of East Germany when the country was divided at the end of World War II. For several years after the war, the Eisenach factory, under new ownership as part of the Soviet bloc, started again making 1930s model BMWs. Forced by legal ruling to not call them BMWs, they became EMWs for Eisenach Motor Works, and they were badged with a red and white roundel. The EMW 327s were given a number of functional improvements, making them true 1950s cars that only looked like they had been built 17 years earlier. This car had a much-traveled life in its earlier years, living in several countries of Europe before landing in the U.S. in 2007. Auctioned at the Hilton Head Concours in 2008, it was bought by Rocky and Henry Grady of Palm City, Florida, who named their EMW Emma. A unique part of BMW EMW history, Emma is a true and historic time machine. This 1951 340 sedan is perhaps the strangest car in the Genesis show. It sports a BMW badge on the front and is, in essence, a BMW 326 of the 1930s. But this car was not built by BMW. The end of the Second World War meant the division of Germany, with the result that BMW lost its car factory in Eisenach to Soviet control. The now East German-owned Eisenach factory still had all the BMW tooling and designs from before the war, and in 1946, it started making those pre-war cars once again. Most still had the kidney grills as well as the BMW logo, but the 340 sedans were given a more conventional grille. The real BMW company in Munich was horrified by all of this and took the matter to court, eventually forcing the Eisenach factory to stop calling its cars BMWs. Nonetheless, many of the Soviet Eisenach BMWs got into Western Europe, and this one, perhaps the only one of the 340 sedans to do so, found its way to the U.S. and into the hands of legendary classic BMW collector Jim Smith. Jim passed away in 2018, and the presence of this quirkiest of BMWs honors his appreciation for even the little-known parts of BMW history. World War II, loss of the Eisenach car factory, and the restrictions on German industry in the early post-war years meant there would be no automobile production by BMW until the 1950s. Surprisingly, for a country recovering from the ravages of war, BMW chose to build luxurious but expensive sedans and cabrios that were nicknamed Baroque Angels because of their swoopy but rather old-fashioned styling. The 501 with its six-cylinder engine was the first post-war BMW car and went on sale in 1951. It was followed 3 years later by the 502 with a more powerful V8 engine. The beautiful cabriolet in front of you with its body by Bauer Coachworks is both a 501 and a 502. It started life in 1956 as a 501 with its six-cylinder engine and remained that way until it was purchased by Josef Hartmann Wernick in 1968. Hartmann Wernick kept the car for 28 years, replacing its engine at some point with a BMW V8, effectively making it a 502. Current owner Lothar Schutler of Darnestown, Maryland, purchased the car in 1996. He had seen Baroque Angels growing up in Frankfurt, Germany. To him, the 502 was a dream car, and still is. He said it captures the best memories of his childhood. Expensive to buy and slow to sell, BMW continued production of the 502 into the 1960s, with the V8 gaining additional horsepower, making it a joy to drive for those who could afford it. The family of Fritz Gebhardt was one of those who could. The top-of-the-line 502 3.2 Super had 140 horsepower, making it a swift and luxurious cruiser on the Autobahn. Fritz Gebhardt used the car for business travel and was often accompanied by his son Alf. When Fritz died in 1968, the 502 went to another family member, but the memory of travels with his dad remained strong with son Alf. If there's a BMW that's universally known, it has to be the 507 Roadster, one of the most beautiful cars ever built. Designed by Count Albrecht Goertz, only 252 were ever made, but all are believed to still exist. This one was ordered by Oskar Liebmann, who took delivery at Schorsch Meyer's BMW dealership in Sternberg, not far from Munich, in April 1958. After driving it around Germany for a couple of weeks, he brought it home to the U.S. Oskar had emigrated from Germany to the U.S. in 1928. He drove his 507 on weekends and special occasions and kept it in immaculate condition until his death in 1983. Having traveled only 27,000 miles since new, the 507 was auctioned by Gooding & Company at Pebble Beach in 2009 for just under $1 million. Its current owner is listed as Mouse Motors of Chicago, Illinois. In the mid-1950s, BMW expanded its range with two of the most beautiful cars it has ever produced, the 503 Coupe and the 507 Roadster. Both were designed by Count Albrecht Goertz, the German-born American whose styling, BMW hoped, would appeal to the growing American market. The 503 Coupe was sophisticated and elegant, winning high praise from Battista Pininfarina himself, after its debut at the Frankfurt Auto Show in 1955. The body was of hand-hammered aluminum, with each car requiring 600 hours of production time, making it extravagantly expensive to buy, but costing BMW even more to produce. Only 412 were ever made before production halted in 19... The 3200 CS is the lineal and literal successor to the 503 coupe. But in between the two models, BMW had gone through bankruptcy that nearly put it out of business permanently. Thanks to industrialist Herbert Quandt, BMW survived, and by 1962 was ready to once again produce a luxury two-door model. This time, BMW turned south for inspiration to Bertone of Turin, Italy, where a young 23-year-old designer named Giorgetto Giugiaro was already making a name for himself. His elegant new design introduced elements that became signatures for BMW, like the round taillights and the Hofmeister kink. But the 3200 would also be the last BMW with the aluminum 3.2-liter twin-carb V8 engine that first introduced in 1955. Only 603 3200s were produced, and this one was among the last. It was built in March 1965, just 6 months before the end of production in September that year. Like so many other classic BMWs, it was sold by a dealer in Germany, purchase details unknown, but was eventually brought to the U.S. and in 1996 found its way to BMW restorer Don Detlefsen. Years later, Boston financial advisor Kevin Whalen saw the car for sale. For years, he had been searching for just such a model, especially because of the design by the now legendary Giugiaro. Kevin has been the happy owner of this 3200 CS since 2014. The 700 is the car known for saving BMW from bankruptcy and takeover by Mercedes-Benz in 1959. It also restored the company's reputation for cars that were fun to drive. As the first post-bankruptcy model, the 700 needed to rebuild the BMW Aura, which it did quite successfully. Driven by Grand Prix legend Hans Stuck, the 700 won 6 hill climb victories and the German championship title in 1960. It was so successful on the track that it became known as the working man's Porsche. This 1960 700 Sport Coupe was originally owned by a BMW race team in Munich, though it's not known exactly how the car was used at the time. We do know it was sold to Hoffman Motors in New York, brought to the U.S., and it did race at Sebring in 1963. The original Isetta Model 300 had room for 2 people only when it was introduced in 1955. 2 years later, BMW introduced an Isetta sedan, the 600, with room for 4 and a side door to access the rear seat. It featured a larger engine producing almost 20 horsepower, but more significantly, it was the first BMW to introduce the semi-trailing arm independent suspension rear axle, which continued in use until 2003. This 1959 600 was delivered to Aurora, Illinois. The first owner didn't keep it very long, but for the second owner, Walter Siegrist, the little 600 became his lifelong passion. He owned the car for 27 years and put 12,000 miles on it. After he died in 1987, the 600 stayed in the family, but was virtually untouched for the next 20 years. The family put it up for sale on eBay in 2007, where David Lowen of Roanoke, Virginia, placed the winning and only bid. Largely original, except what age and experience required fixing or replacing, David has given it the two-tone look you see here, adding the light gray color to the upper body, a nice complement to the original azure blue.
They were stopped in all production. So the company then turned to make brakes for locomotives. That wasn't doing so hot. And then they came with their motorcycle where they brought in young engineers and their engine guy. These guys from the airplane factory. And they built motorcycles, were successful in that, and then they decided to venture in the cars.
Wow.
And this is all after World War I.
After World War I. What's amazing, this doesn't look anything like American 56 stuff. You notice that? Nothing like this.
That's kind of pretty cool. Start making
A legendary 1958 507 Roadster. Not many around. Very rare. $1 million car. Easy. Perfect condition.
I saw her this day. This is the